This year has been and remains an interesting time for global supply chains. As trade wars rage, sourcing maps are being redrawn, and the shifting of supply chain often creates a domino effect across all continents. Opportunities arise in new sourcing regions, but also with them additional challenges. Note I say additional, but not necessarily unexpected. Today we will hear more about the different challenges that global supply chains are facing. But more importantly, we will hear about the solutions and a different way these challenges can or are already being addressed today. To open our first session of the conference, which is navigating the shifting landscape of global sourcing and supply chain, we're going to dive straight into the topic of trade wars. QIMA has been keeping an eye on how the trade wars are affecting our clients and partners. Last year, in our annual survey, we reported about half of our companies we polled reported being affected. This year, that has increased to over 2/3. So I'd like to invite to the stage our moderator, Finbarr Bermingham, who's a reporter from the South China Morning Post, and our panellists to the stage. I'd also like them if they could give just a brief introduction of who they are.
Thanks, Courtney. Everybody's got a mic. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here this morning. I'm Finbarr Bermingham. I work at the SCMP here in Hong Kong, and I report a lot on the trade war. So it's great to be here to discuss it in what seems to be a bit of a quiet week in relative terms. No new tariffs. Certainly by the end of the week, we'll probably have some escalation. It seems to be the way it works. We're in our fortnightly truce. I'll just get each of the panellists to introduce themselves for about 30 seconds. We've only got half an hour, so we'll power straight on and try and get through as much as possible this morning. So, Sally?
Right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sally Payne. I'm a partner for Sandler Rosenberg, overseeing their Asia-Pacific operation. We're a U.S. law firm that focuses just on duty, tariff, and free trade. So it has been a very particular 2-year span of our life.
Hello, everybody. I'm Alicia Garcia Herrero. I'm an economist. I think I'm the only economist in the panel. I feel very lonely. Generally, it's like so many lawyers. I cover Asia, and I've been following the trade war for a while, so happy to share views.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Robert Greaves. I'm the chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong, the largest international chamber in Hong Kong, and one of the largest chambers outside of the U.S. I also am the founder and managing director of Hamilton Advisors, which is my PR firm. We do financial communications and corporate communications.
Good morning. My name is Holly Smith. I'm a consultant based here in Hong Kong. From 2009 to 2015, I was an official with the U.S. Trade Representative in Washington, focused on U.S.-China trade relations. So that's my perspective.
Thanks, folks. Just to set the scene slightly, last week we had a round of talks in the US, which resulted in what seems to be a phase one deal, a partial deal, which will see some of the, will see China buy about, this is according to President Trump, we haven't seen any official confirmation of this, but $40 to $50 billion worth of US agricultural goods, in exchange for which a tariff increase, which was due to come into effect on Tuesday, didn't come into effect on Chinese goods. And we've heard that if the deal is signed at the APEC summit in Chile on November 15th, then the tariffs on the December 15th round of duties, which is targeting consumer goods, iPhones, smartphones, laptops, that won't come in either. That'll be delayed. People have been calling it kicking the can down the road. President Trump described it as the biggest and the greatest trade deal ever made. I'd like to, at this stage, turn to Holly, who has just said that she's spent many years negotiating trade deals on behalf of the US government. Holly, how do you tally with that statement from Trump?
Well, first of all, I would say this is not exactly a deal yet. It sounds like there are parameters for a deal they will work towards to sign possibly as early as November, but there's nothing in writing. There are the same contentious issues that are very hard to resolve on the table. It looks like they've outlined some that they think they can have an early harvest on. But we've seen this before, and it's fallen apart. So I think they're at a very fragile stage, and the next few weeks will tell whether they're able to actually get anything in writing, get anything that's concrete and an actual agreement. At this point, you don't have an actual agreement, but it's at least positive atmospherics for the next few weeks.
Yeah, but that's a really interesting point, because we saw this in May, where both sides were, well, the US certainly was trumpeting what was an agreement which was soon to be signed, only for China to send back a completely redacted version of the 140 or 50-page document. So there is some suggestion that President Trump may be jumping the gun slightly on this one. But Alethea, as the economist on the panel, how significant is this in economic terms? Is this just something that will maybe bump the markets for a while, or does this have any wider resonance economically?
The truth, whether the truth is relevant, is irrelevant. It's irrelevant because I don't think anybody in this room will wait for these people to agree on anything anymore. I mean, this sounds like Brexit. I mean, you can give them a chance, you can give them a second chance, but if you're operating somewhere, say in China, to serve, I'm not talking about serving the Chinese market, that's a different topic, but if you're serving somebody else's market, you're running away. Why would you stay? And this might take time, and it's not, of course, something you can do all of a sudden, but that's your direction. And I don't think any mini deal truce or anything like that is going to change anybody's view, because you know this is structural. And by the way, nobody's even talking about lifting the existing tariffs. Right. Yeah. So it's only about future tariffs, and beyond tariffs, many other things are happening that are affecting everybody, including export licenses. Nobody's talking about whether they would go back to, softer or wider export licenses. The concept of sensitive technology is very wide, so anything can get in there. And of course, we have financial decoupling, IPOs. We have now this wonderful news that pension funds in the U.S. may be rethinking whether they can actually buy Chinese paper. I mean, it's like well beyond this nitty-gritty of these truths, which doesn't even seem to be happening. So it's such a small thing that they're discussing compared to all of the many issues that are on the table. And I don't think I would spend my time looking at whether they actually agree on that specific point to take a decision.
Can I jump in? Yep. So I'm going to jump in here. Is that I completely agree with what Alicia just said. I think that if you think about, I know that trade war has been around for quite some time for us. There's a lot of new news that coming up. So it seemed to be like yesterday, but it has been going on for quite some time. And then in the earlier days, my day will start with the tweet, and whenever the tweet started it, and I'll get a call from the client saying, "Oh my God, Sally, my product is going to be paid 15 or 25 or 30." And then you get a lot of calls like this where we usually, as a trained attorney, we need to get confirmation. So we oftentimes will have to wait until U.S. Custom, where inside their system, they will actually, someone has to go inside, manually change the number associated to a particular item in order to know that's for real. So we've been tracking that. But what I can tell you, why I agree with Alicia 100%, is that recently, no matter how much news that are going on Finbarr's tweet, you don't get that much call anymore, because people are not, of course they're following, but the damage has been done. And then particularly for the supply chain and the companies that need to have a long supply chain, they have either moved or have given up on the place that the industry that they're working on. So it is affecting day-to-day operation for many of us, but on the flip side, it also does not affect the decision-making process of a lot of manufacturing industries.
If I could just jump in, we surveyed our members recently, and on Monday published the results, and pessimism is up. 24% of those surveyed, so we have about 1,400 members, 1,300 to 1,400 members, and this was a sample of 154. And 24% of that number are thinking of moving out, with Singapore being the #1 destination. 76% say they're going to stay and try to tough it out. 82% say they're making contingency plans. They're very worried. The percentages are all about, there's a great deal of angst and concern right now. And people want to stay in Hong Kong because Hong Kong is a great place to do business, third largest stock exchange in the world, et cetera. But this whole situation and atmospherics is making it very, very difficult for people.
Just on that point, I was down at the HKTDC Electronics Fair yesterday, and it was pretty dead. Like there weren't too many people around. But some of the people that I did, one of the interesting things I noticed, first of all, was there were Chinese companies, and they had the name of the company, which had, say, like Shenzhen in the title, but behind them were huge banners, made in Vietnam. And this was something that they were very keen to display, because when I spoke to some of them, they said that the buyers were bypassing those that said made in China. They were purposely seeking out those with Taiwan or with Vietnam. And this goes back to your point, Sally, if you haven't already thought about that move, then it's possibly too late, because buyers are already looking elsewhere. And Robert, on your point there, the survey that you made, obviously a confluence of issues there with the Hong Kong demonstrations, the US-China trade war. How granular was that data? Was there a way of separating which of these issues US companies are more worried about?
We tried to break it down and get as granular as we could. But the best I can say is that everything feeds into this. There's not one specific element. For example, if the demonstrations ended tomorrow, would that help? Maybe, but that's not the entire reason. We've still got the trade issue. And I think more importantly is there's concern about what's China going to do? What's the next step? So we have issues with trade. We have issues some of our members do business in China, some are in ASEAN, and so it's just a complex of issues for us.
Yeah. Alicia used the D word, decoupling, already. Deglobalization, fragmentation, regionalization. This is something that people have been talking about for many years. It's not directly related to the trade war, but I think we are certainly in sentiment terms seeing an acceleration of this where companies are making closer to the markets and so on. And Alicia, I know that you've looked into this a lot. Is that irreversible? Is that inevitable now that you will see a regionalization of the global supply chain?
Okay. So we've been doing quite a lot of work with input-output tables, and the good thing is that there is a lot of data out there for anybody who wants to try. It takes a little bit of time, but what you find, and this is actually already researched, but there's nothing really new, but I think people don't really realize. So I want to make this very strong point that global value chains have been coming down in actual value since 2008. This is not the trade war. This has been happening for a long time. And most importantly, this is a report that I hope we will issue today. What I'm really surprised is that it's not so much because value chains are becoming more regional, which is what I would have expected. It's not even true that, first of all, for Asia, the Asian value chain has been coming down as well. And even the linkage with China is weaker than it was before on the import side. So basically, the import component of Chinese inputs, which then get re-exported, has come down. So in other words, China is more integrated, vertically integrated within China, but it imports less intermediary goods, which are then re-exported. However, the rest of the world depends more on China. This is true for Europe, this is true for Asia. So in other words, on the exit side, on the export of intermediate goods from China, which are then used and re-exported in consumer good format by the rest of Asia or Europe, that's on the up side. Net is lower. But what I'm saying is like an asymmetric dependence. I hope this is not too complicated. So the rest of the world depends on China as imports of intermediate goods, but China becomes less and less dependent on its own imports. And how long can this go on? How long can this go on? And therefore, I am on the view that value chains will continue to be less and less relevant because it's becoming so asymmetric. And China being so humongous, its market being so humongous, this vertical integration can go all the way, pushing trade down globally, which is what we see in the data. Yeah.
And there's, all the other political risks that we see at the moment, the NBA stuff last week, obviously the situation stuff with the Uyghurs in Western China. There are so many things for a company to consider these days whenever they're deciding whether China is the place to stay, whether whether they want to move their manufacturing, whether they want to manufacture domestically for China. And I want to bring Holly in here as somebody who works as an advisor now. I mean, you've got your work cut out, right? Trying to draw up a plan for a company who's trying to navigate all these issues. It must be a huge challenge.
I think it's very confusing. Obviously, I mean, you would know better than me. Even that there are so many issues swirling around, and a lot of them are just, frankly, they're long-term issues that are just coming to a head now. In part because we're just at that moment, I think, with our economies, but also President Trump and his policies are extremely confrontational, and so that's helping to bring at least the trade issues that have been very long-standing. As a government official, when I was in the Obama administration, we worked on many of the same issues. My colleagues who were in the Bush administration worked on many of these issues, but they're really coming to the fore now because of the very confrontational approach that President Trump is taking. And they're long-term issues, and they will outlast him as well. And I think companies need to prepare themselves for that this is sort of long-term tensions that we will have to figure out how to navigate.
I also think that it's very industry specific as well. And if you look at before the trade war, other than being a trade attorney during the day, I have a side job. I'm the co-chair for the apparel and footwear supply chain committee at MCHEN Hong Kong. One of our vice chair will be here, Lynn. She will give a great presentation. And we, as a apparel, footwear, and accessory industry, even before trade war, because the labor cost is so high in China, there's already a movement out of China for at least 10 years. So take one of my large clients, for example, about 10 years ago, we're already working with them, trying to have their sourcing people to see the world with landed cost. I know a lot of us are still looking at FOB basis. Starting 10 years ago, some of the big retailer in the US and EU start looking at things at landed cost basis. Landed cost is not just about the price that you pay. It also includes duty. Obviously now is a big factor, and the other one really is the supply chain cost as well, the freight and everything. So some of our clients start 10 years ago. When they look at the landed costs, basically they look at where they're going to produce their goods on the left-hand side. And then you give me where you're going to sell your goods on the right-hand side. As trade attorney, we should be able to come up with the metrics to be able to tell you that which part, where you source your goods from, will have the lowest landed costs. I know there's a lot of uncertainty, but then when it comes down to it, really is the bottom line, how much you pay for your landed costs. That's everything. So starting 10 years ago, and this is already a constant practice that we do for a lot of clients. So when trade war started 18 months ago, some of our clients has less than 10%, 15% in China. And those 10 and 15% are not even for US or Western market. It's for China strategy. So I would say that for apparel, footwear, and accessory, we're a little bit ahead of a lot of people. When trade war started, if you look at toy industry and small consumer appliance, they're 99% still in China. So some of the industry will have a harder time than the other industries.
Well, apparel, footwear, that industry has faced heavy tariffs. It's nothing new, right? They're masters of the supply chain. For an electronics or something like that, this is something new for them. What are you seeing? And I'll open this up. For companies who are in sort of industries that aren't necessarily used to dealing with all these tariffs, where are they going? Because everybody talks about Vietnam. Vietnam seems to be pretty full. The infrastructure's not up to it. A lot of talk about Mexico, but where are these more advanced industries going?
Vietnam is definitely overheated. We're worried of, we've been monitoring some of the Vietnam factory for the first time, and these are the garment factory, the accessory factory, probably not going to be profitable this year. Not because the business is not good. Business is great, but they couldn't find workers because workers is moving on to a higher value chain, to like electronic industry, for perhaps even for iPhone in particular. So for electronic sectors, we see them moving to Malaysia. For mold injecting, I think that Vietnam, Thailand are strong. Accessory are moving to a lot of countries where they have duty-free access to the U.S. Garment, obviously, not only moving to Bangladesh, even more so before, after Rana, and then even moving to Africa as well. So there's a lot of places, but one of the things that I always wanted to remind our community is that for the product, right now we do see a lot of issues, especially from U.S. customs side, that a lot of products are being really just transshipped. They're not really having any kind of transformation in Vietnam or in Malaysia, and this is on everyone's radar. And I know the time is tough, it's challenging, but it's still like transshipment is absolutely illegal. I was in one of the presentation. I went first, and then the next presentation was a freight forwarding company giving a slice of that if your duty is on 15%, and then if you transship through this Malaysia port, and then it's going to be a $1,000 per container. But if your duty rate is 25%, then each container will go up to 3,000. So I was sitting down there, I was like, do people understand this is absolutely illegal? So I raised the question. He said, oh, this is not so much illegal, but just high risk. I said, no, this is illegal.
The risk of getting caught.
Right, you're going to jail type of illegal. So we're very understanding. For large company, they may be able to weather this, but for SME, it's really tough. So many of them are not going to be able to survive this. But then still, like, transshipment is not an option.
Yeah.
If I can just jump in
Sure.
and summarize what Sally just said, there is no viable option right now. I mean, the supply chain in China is, over the last 40 years, has been so developed, and the talent has been built up. You cannot replicate that overnight next year or even the next 5 years, I think.
How are we doing for time? 10 minutes. Oh, happy days. Okay. So can we sort of bring it back a bit? So if you can't do transshipment, which you can't, you just heard it from Sally, what can you do? What are the alternatives? And I'll open this up to the panel. Is there, apart from moving your factory out of China, what are people doing to try and mitigate these tariffs and get around it? Another one for Sally, maybe.
I actually agree with Robert said. There is not a lot of a viable option. But when it comes down to it, if you do want to reduce duty, there's several duty mitigation methodology that you could use that's still flying under the radar of Trump administration. One of them is called first sale. Our firm invented them 30 years ago. You could use, what it means that in the U.S. Custom allow the importer to use just the factory cost to calculate the duty, but it's not easy. It's not easy to do this. You need to be qualified with quite a few requirements in order to do that. And U.S. Custom, of course, on their list of the check, the first one is transshipment, the second one is probably first sale. So if you want to use that methodology, you need to be very careful and then make sure that you're doing all the due diligence work. The other type of tariff reduction methodology is to look some of your product. Perhaps your product can be engineering in terms of a tariff to be able to be outside of the list. Right now, there's really not much product are not on the list. There are some of them on the list 4A, B, and all type of things, but there are things that you may be able to do. And then the last one to come down to it is really to look at your product, how much you can be done in China in terms of process, and then the last transformation activities being done outside of China. Therefore, you acquire that country origin before shipping to the U.S. because the tariff is against product that has country of origin of China, not shipping through China. We have some confusion there. We have some clients, they ship through China, but their product is from Spain, their product is from Germany. They're totally fine. Keep shipping China is never an issue. It's that you just cannot do a deep dive of the transformation in China.
Finbarr.
Yes, Robert.
I just want to knock something on its head as we move on. This may be the only panel where we discuss politics, but politics is a big part of this. And I think folks in the room need to understand, every year, our AmCham, we lead a delegation to Washington and then to Beijing. The Beijing trip is coming up at the end of this month, but in June we were in Washington. And I think, as many of you know, but maybe not all of you know, China is perceived on Capitol Hill and in the administration as an existential threat right now. So while we were gratified that people now know where Hong Kong is on the map, we were getting very stony and very difficult arguments. And this goes to Holly's neck of the woods, and I don't know if you want to comment on that. And I don't see this attitude towards China changing anytime as long as this administration is in office.
I agree, and I think even if this administration is succeeded at some point by a Democrat, the attitude has shifted so much that Democrats see great benefit in bashing China. There's basically no downside at this point politically in the U.S. to knocking China. So it will be hard. And I think a point about the tariffs, I would plan for the tariffs to be in place for a long time, because I think it'll be quite difficult to roll back what's already there. From a negotiating perspective, tariffs are leverage. You wouldn't want to give up that leverage without getting something substantive in return, and it's a big question as to whether, what that calculus will be. What is substantive enough to roll them back? And that leaves us in quite a scary place, I think.
Yeah. I mean, understanding that there's ways to reduce the impact of tariffs, and understanding Sally's point that, and Robert's point that there's no China right there in the short run. I just don't think companies can only play with this arbitrage of tariffs, because that's a very short-term solution, and this is a long-term problem. So I guess any relevant size-wise company will be thinking of not only perhaps only Vietnam, but actually trying to find a place which is closer to the client and which is more aligned to the client. And this brings us to the politics of it. So what I hear from some of our clients, I forgot to say that I work for Natixis. I just realized when I was introducing myself, this is a French investment bank. I hear many of our clients saying, we're basically into ecosystems. And this is not only ICT. This is actually, and I won't name the company's name, but it goes all the way to raw materials. I mean, it's just unbelievable that you see companies that do not want to have a back end on the wrong place. And if this is the case, I just don't think you're going to calculate, maybe now, Sally, but down the road, you're going to say the risks that I'm encountering are many more than just tariffs. So how do I deal with those risks? They can be reputational risks. They can be, we were talking about MBA before. There can be customer related. So also from the West, what about if Western clients start saying, if this happened to us, why would we buy, and this doesn't have to be government driven, but basically customer driven. So not only China has netizens, netizens exist everywhere, and they tend to behave they tend to follow her behavior. So I'm just thinking that the risk is so high of operating in across different platforms or ecosystems today, that companies will start thinking, well, this is one for this place, this is one for the other place. So that will indeed reshape, no matter the cost. Vietnam might be very small, but there are many other places out there. And we would have to think about India's new reforms in terms of tax exemptions. Maybe not now, maybe in 10 years. But I do think that the world is bigger than only China. Maybe not today, but in the future. We know obviously that the President Trump keeps a close eye on the trade balance with all of these countries. So there's nothing to say that if you move your production to Vietnam, that's going to be tariff-free forever. But we've got a couple of minutes for questions from the audience, if anybody wants to raise their hand. Oh. Okay. Well, I guess to finish up, we are in a time of real flux. The world is in a place I don't know that anybody's ever seen. I wonder if anybody wants to make a bold statement about how the supply chain picture will look in 5 years. Will it be completely regionalized? Alicia, you want to volunteer? I don't think it'll be geographically regionalized. It will be politically regionalized, which is a very different option out there. So you better take a 101 politics course and see who is where, and because that's going to be very, very important.
Great stuff. Okay, a good way to finish things off. Thank you very much to the panel, and thanks for joining us this morning.